January 12, 1944, Cairo, just past midnight. The room was thick with cigarette smoke and fatigue when Winston Churchill finally spoke. His voice, hoarse from travel and strain, cut through the silence. Britain needed a victory. Not soon, not eventually, now. Across the table sat General Sir Harold Alexander, commander of Allied forces in the Mediterranean. Calm, unmoved, he had heard this demand before, delivered in different cities by different men, always with the same urgency. The offensive in Italy, Churchill insisted, could not be allowed to stall. Newspapers in London spoke of mud and delay. Parliament whispered of drift. The British public, hardened by years of war, still needed proof that sacrifice meant momentum. Alexander did not argue the politics. He argued the ground. Italy in winter was a weapon in itself. Rain had turned valleys into swamps. Roads collapsed under armor. Mountains funneled divisions into killing zones. German defenses were intact, layered, and patient. To attack now would not inspire morale, it would consume it. Men would die for ground that could not be held. Churchill leaned forward. He spoke of history's judgment, of patience mistaken for weakness, of the danger of appearing passive while the Red Army advanced in the east and American industry thundered behind the lines. Britain could not afford to look hesitant. Britain had once ruled events. Now it reacted to them. Alexander answered quietly. An offensive launched for appearances would fail in reality. Timing was not a detail, it was the difference between maneuver and massacre. If they waited, the blow could break the German line. If they rushed, it would harden it. Outside the room, the war continued without pause. On the Italian front, 400,000 Allied troops waited in mud-soaked positions. German artillery registered their coordinates daily. Every hour without movement felt like surrender to those watching from afar. But Alexander knew something Churchill could not say aloud. Victory, at this moment, depended not on action, but on restraint. And restraint would never make headlines. The pressure that brought Churchill to Cairo had been building for months. By the winter of 1943, the Allied advance in Italy had slowed to a crawl. Rome remained in German hands. The Gustav Line, anchored at Monte Cassino, had become a symbol of frustration, an immovable barrier defying Allied promises of swift victory after the landings at Salerno. British newspapers printed maps with arrows that went nowhere. Editorials questioned the strategy without naming it. In the House of Commons, backbenchers asked why men were dying for hills that did not matter. Churchill felt this pressure personally. He had championed the Mediterranean strategy, arguing that Italy was the soft underbelly of the Axis. Every stalled advance was not merely a military problem, but a challenge to his judgment. Across the Atlantic, American commanders increasingly favored a direct assault in France. Delay in Italy risked confirming their doubts and diminishing British influence over the wider war. General Alexander understood these currents. A tall, measured officer, he had learned to speak carefully around politicians who needed certainty where none existed. His command stretched from the beaches of Naples to the frozen ridges south of Rome. He received daily reports. Infantry battalions reduced by half, tanks immobilized by mud, mule trains replacing trucks. German Field Marshal Albert Kesselring had turned terrain into doctrine. He did not need to defeat the Allies, he only needed to delay them. Cables from London grew sharper. Progress essential for home front, one message warned. Another spoke of visible action. The language was diplomatic, but the meaning was unmistakable. Something must be done, and soon. Alexander resisted. Not openly, not defiantly, but with facts, weather forecasts, engineering assessments, casualty projections. He pointed out that the Germans expected an attack. Surprise was gone. Supply lines were stretched thin. Artillery ammunition was limited. An assault launched now would expend the strength needed for the decisive moment still to come. Churchill listened, but impatience weighed heavily on him. He had championed the Mediterranean strategy, arguing that Italy was the soft underbelly of the Axis. Every stalled advance was not merely a military problem, but a challenge to his judgment. Across the Atlantic, American commanders increasingly favored a direct assault in France. Delay in Italy risked confirming their doubts and diminishing British influence over the wider war. Cables from London grew sharper. Progress essential for home front, one message warned. Another spoke of visible action. The language was diplomatic, but the meaning was unmistakable. Something must be done, and soon. Alexander resisted. Not openly, not defiantly, but with facts. Weather forecasts, engineering assessments, casualty projections. He pointed out that the Germans expected an attack. Surprise was gone. Supply lines were stretched thin. Artillery ammunition was limited. An assault launched now would expend the strength needed for the decisive moments still to come. Churchill listened, but impatience weighed heavily on him. He had championed the Mediterranean strategy, arguing that Italy was the soft underbelly of the Axis. Every stalled advance was not merely a military problem, but a challenge to his judgment. Across the Atlantic, American commanders increasingly favored a direct assault in France. Delay in Italy risked confirming their doubts and diminishing British influence over the wider war. By late January 1944, the tension had hardened into something personal. The Allied command now faced a narrowing window. Intelligence reports confirmed that German reinforcements were moving south. Kesselring was strengthening the Gustav Line with deliberate calm, confident that winter itself fought on his side. Every week of delay made his position stronger. Every week of haste risked catastrophe. Churchill pressed again. From his temporary quarters, he drafted messages that blended urgency with warning. Britain, he wrote, could not endure a war that appeared static. The nation had survived the Blitz, the Atlantic, and North Africa. It would not forgive inertia. He spoke of the moral front, insisting that armies fought not only with guns, but with belief. Without movement, belief decayed. Alexander replied with restraint bordering on defiance. He cited figures that refused to bend to rhetoric. Infantry divisions were operating at barely 60% strength. Engineers reported that bridging equipment could not be moved fast enough through flooded valleys. Air support was limited by cloud cover so thick that pilots returned without seeing the ground. He reminded Churchill, carefully, that a failed offensive would do more damage to morale than waiting. Thousands of casualties, gained ground lost again, headlines filled with names instead of victories. The public might never forgive that either. The debate now extended beyond the two men. American commanders watched closely. General Mark Clark, commanding the U.S. Fifth Army, chafed under constraints he believed excessive. He believed aggression itself created opportunity. British caution, he thought, risked prolonging the campaign indefinitely. In private conversations, officers took sides. Some admired Alexander's discipline. Others whispered that the war rewarded boldness, not patience. The frontline soldier, meanwhile, endured the consequences of both arguments, waiting under fire, advancing without certainty, dying without explanation. On January 22, an attempt to break the deadlock was launched at Anzio. The landings were bold, risky, and intended to force the German line to collapse from behind. For a moment, it seemed Churchill's instincts might be vindicated. The beaches were taken with minimal resistance. Rome lay just 30 miles away. Then came hesitation. The beachhead stalled. German divisions moved swiftly, sealing the opportunity. What was meant to be a decisive stroke became another grinding test of endurance. Casualties mounted, momentum evaporated. The gamble neither satisfied political hunger nor resolved military reality. Churchill absorbed the news in silence. The lesson was unmistakable. Boldness without timing was not courage, it was a waste. Alexander, now vindicated but not triumphant, pressed his point once more. The main offensive must wait. It must be prepared meticulously, artillery stockpiled, air superiority ensured, ground hardened by spring. There would be no dramatic announcement, no stirring headlines, only the slow, invisible work of readiness. And that, Alexander knew, was the decision that mattered most, because when the order finally came, there would be no second chance. February 1944 arrived without forgiveness. At Monte Cassino, the Allied armies faced the physical embodiment of their dilemma. The ancient monastery sat atop a mountain dominating the Liri Valley, its stone walls older than any nation now fighting beneath them. German forces occupied the slopes below, not the abbey itself, but the position controlled every approach to Rome. No advance could bypass it. No victory could ignore it. Pressure returned with renewed force. Churchill, now back in correspondence rather than presence, asked the question that haunted every level of command. If not now, when? Each delay carried its own cost. The Soviet Union bled millions on the Eastern Front. The invasion of France loomed, demanding resources and attention. Italy risked becoming a sideshow that consumed men without shaping the war. Alexander stood firm. He authorized no major breakthrough attempt without conditions being met. Divisions were rotated and rebuilt. Artillery pieces were dragged forward inch by inch. Ammunition dumps grew in the valleys. Air planners waited for clear skies that never seemed to come. To observers, it looked like paralysis. To those inside the machinery of war, it was preparation on a brutal scale. Then came the decision that would define the moment. On February 15, Allied bombers were ordered to strike Monte Cassino itself. The abbey, believed, and correctly, to be used as a German observation post, was reduced to rubble in hours. More than 1,400 tons of bombs fell from the sky. The shockwave was felt for miles. History collapsed in clouds of dust and fire. The outcome was immediate and irreversible. The bombing did not dislodge the Germans. It improved their position. Paratroopers moved into the ruins, transforming shattered stone into a fortress stronger than before. The attack satisfied neither strategy nor morale. It shocked the world, hardened resistance, and added another layer of tragedy to an already unforgiving campaign. Churchill later called it one of the gravest errors of the war. For Alexander, it reinforced the truth he had argued from the beginning. Action taken to answer pressure rather than reality carried consequences no order could undo. The offensive spirit demanded by politics had collided with the mathematics of terrain and timing and lost. Yet, even now, he refused to rush. Behind the scenes, the true offensive was being shaped. A coordinated assault, multiple armies, over 1,600 artillery guns, total air dominance. No gesture, no symbolism, only force applied at the precise moment the enemy could no longer absorb it. This was the restraint Churchill had resisted and now accepted. In a private exchange, the Prime Minister conceded the point without surrendering pride. Britain would wait. The offensive would come when it could succeed, not when it could be announced. History, he wrote, would judge outcomes, not impatience. The waiting continued. Men died in small numbers instead of large ones. Newspapers printed little. The public saw nothing. But beneath the surface, the decision had been made. The war in Italy would be won not by demand, but by delay. By a choice that could not be explained, defended, or celebrated at the time it mattered most. May 11th, 1944, 11 p.m., along the entire Italian front. The night erupted without warning. More than 1,600 Allied guns opened fire simultaneously, shattering the silence that had held for months. The ground trembled from the Tyrrhenian Sea to the Adriatic. Shells fell with mathematical precision, each battery firing from positions prepared in secrecy and patience. This was the moment Alexander had waited for. This was the moment Churchill had been forced to accept. Operation Diadem had begun. 4 Allied armies advanced together, British, American, French, and Polish, coordinated in a way never before achieved in the campaign. The weather had finally turned. The ground was firm. Air power ruled the skies. German reserves were stretched thin. Kesselring's line, strong against haste, could not withstand preparation on this scale. Within days, the Gustav Line cracked. French forces broke through the Urunqi Mountains, once thought to be impassable. Polish troops assaulted the heights of Monte Cassino, suffering thousands of casualties before raising their flag over the ruins on May 18th. The road to Rome opened at last, not through brilliance in a single moment, but through endurance validated over time. Churchill received the news with relief rather than triumph. He understood now what the public never would, that the victory belonged as much to the weeks of waiting as to the days of fighting. The morale he had feared losing was restored not by action taken too soon, but by action taken at the only moment it could succeed. The consequences were immediate and permanent. Rome fell on June 4th. German forces withdrew northward, no longer masters of central Italy. The Mediterranean campaign, once derided, had fulfilled its purpose, tying down divisions that would never face the Normandy landings 2 days later. Power shifted quietly. Alexander's reputation emerged strengthened, defined by judgment rather than spectacle. Churchill's authority endured, tempered by a rare concession to restraint. The relationship between political will and military reality had been rewritten, not in theory, but in blood and timing. This moment mattered beyond Italy. It marked the end of an era in which audacity alone could define leadership. The modern war demanded coordination, patience, and acceptance of truths that could not be explained to crowds. Victory was no longer declared, it was engineered. What Churchill said when the offensive had to wait was never printed in bold type. It did not rally crowds or fill speeches. It acknowledged something harder than resolve, that sometimes the most decisive act of leadership is to do nothing until everything is ready. And once that moment passed, it could not be undone.